On a gray morning in November 1944, a German sniper named Herbert Wandrei was pulled from a collapsed farmhouse cellar outside Aachen by two soldiers of the United States 30th Infantry Division. He had been trapped under rubble for 11 hours, sustained by a canteen of water and the training that told him to stay still and make no sound. When a medic cut away his sleeve and found no wounds, Wandrei was handed off to an intelligence officer who spoke serviceable German. The officer expected resistance. He got a question. He asked Wandrei what he wanted to say, and Wandrei asked how the Americans had known where to find him. The officer told him a sergeant had heard breathing beneath the rubble and marked the spot with a rifle stuck bayonet down in the ground before moving on. Wandrei considered this for a long moment, then said something that the intelligence officer included in his after-action report as an afterthought, almost embarrassed to have written it down. He said, "These men are not afraid to die for strangers." He did not mean it as a compliment exactly. He meant it as an explanation. He had spent 4 years trying to understand what made American soldiers so difficult to predict, and he believed he had finally found the answer in a single act by a sergeant who had no reason to mark that spot except that he chose to. What Wandrei described, in different language, in different circumstances, is what dozens of German snipers and marksmen reported when interrogated in the final 18 months of the war. Not the artillery, which everyone feared. Not the air power, which paralyzed movement by day. Something harder to quantify and harder to counter. A quality of aggressive care, of soldiers who fought ferociously and yet still paused to mark a collapsed cellar. The German Sniper Corps of the Second World War was among the most systematically trained and operationally effective in history. The German Army's ground forces, developed sniper doctrine through the interwar period with a rigor that reflected their broader investment in infantry expertise. The first formal sniper school opened at Zossen in 1942, supplemented by training centers at Döberitz, and later at facilities in Poland and France. By 1943, the Wehrmacht fielded roughly 6,000 trained snipers across the eastern and western fronts, each carrying a Kar 98 Ki bolt-action rifle fitted with a ZF-41 or ZF-4 telescopic sight, or the more capable ZF-39, which offered a 4-power magnification sufficient for consistent engagement at 600 meters under field conditions. German snipers on the Eastern Front had operated against Soviet forces for nearly 3 years before significant contact with Americans. The experience had shaped their doctrine in ways that would prove unexpectedly important. Soviet tactics, particularly early in the war, involved massed infantry advances that presented relatively predictable targets. German snipers learned to exploit patterns, to read terrain, to understand how frightened men moved, and where they instinctively sought cover. By the time German snipers began encountering Americans in North Africa in late 1942, and then in Italy and France, they had accumulated a body of hard-won tactical experience that no training manual could fully replicate. The initial German assessment of American soldiers as marksmen was contemptuous. After the disaster at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, when elements of Rommel's Afrika Korps tore through raw American positions in Tunisia with relative ease, German soldiers reported that Americans fired their weapons wildly, without fire discipline, and could not hit stationary targets at ranges that any trained German rifleman would consider routine. A report compiled by Rommel's headquarters in March 1943 noted that American soldiers shot at sounds and shadows, that they were generous with ammunition in inverse proportion to their accuracy, and that their marksmanship training appeared to have been entirely inadequate. This was not entirely unfair criticism. The United States Army of 1942 trained soldiers in rifle marksmanship against stationary targets at fixed ranges under conditions that bore little resemblance to combat. Men qualified at 200 and 300 yards against paper silhouettes in good light on prepared ranges. The connection between this training and hitting a camouflaged man, moving between trees in reduced visibility, was theoretical at best. German soldiers who had grown up hunting in the Bavarian mountains or the forests of East Prussia came to combat with an intuitive understanding of field marksmanship that no American training program could replicate in months. But what happened in the 2 years that followed, Kasserine, changed the calculation in ways that German snipers found genuinely unsettling. The Americans began to learn, and they learned in the specific institutional way that would come to define American military adaptation throughout the war. The story of how America